Hey, what's going on everybody? My name is TAETRO here for 343 Labs, and I want to talk to you today about looping in Ableton Live. Now, using loops is one of the core ways you create music with Ableton Live, and that's one of the reasons it kind of looks different than most other DAWs. So when you first open Ableton Live, you have Session View, which is sort of different than the timeline you're used to seeing on a normal DAW. And what Session View is a collection of clips or loops, and you can change the length of these loops, the timing of these loops. There can be audio loops and MIDI loops. And this core function of looping and creating musical ideas this way in Ableton Live causes a lot of people to stumble at first, because it's not like you just hit record and start playing. You have to actually be in time with your project. Now, let's say you're a guitar player or a beatboxer and you're used to more of a traditional looper. Ableton Live has that. It's an audio effect called looper. And essentially what it does is on your track, whether it's your voice, guitar, or it could even be a MIDI track, you put on this device and you get a nice big record button, and it will record when you press record and loop when you press it again. I'm going to tell you that today we're not going to be using that at all. Now, there's plenty of advantages in using the actual looper in Ableton Live, but Ableton's Session View with the clips and the loops like we just talked about is in itself one massive looper. Let me show you what I mean. The first thing I need to know when I'm looping in Ableton Live is my project's tempo, and I need to be actively listening to my project's tempo. So if I turn my metronome on right here and I click play, you notice the higher pitched click is my downbeat. Now this is very important. These are cycles of 4. So now that I can hear my metronome in time, I want to take a look at the global launch quantization. And then that's just a big fancy way of saying how many beats is it going to take for our recorded clips or our loops to start playing after we hit the button. So if it's set to 1 bar like it usually is, that means if the time of the project is running, like it is now, and I press play on a clip, it will not come in until the next downbeat, the next 1 bar. 2, 3, 4, 1. Notice how I clicked play, but the clip did not come in right away. It waited till the downbeat of the next bar. You can change the global launch quantization, and let's say set it to 2 bars. So I'm going to stop that clip, but run the time, listening to my metronome. Press play. 3, 4, 2, 2. Here it comes. So that time around, it waited 2 bars to come in. And you can play with different global launch quantizations, whatever fits you best. I usually keep mine at 1 bar because I know at the next downbeat, it'll start playing. Now let's try recording a drum loop, and I'll show you how that works. We have to do some kind of fancy button pressing, and I'll explain it after. Now let me show you how I normally record a drum loop. Now there's a little bit of a process here, and I have to push the buttons at the exact right time, but I'm going to explain it when I'm done. But essentially I'm going to run the time, and once I press the record button on my launch key here, I know that I'm going to start recording on the next downbeat. 1, 2, ready, go. Now notice that I pressed record again. This is to get it to loop, because if I didn't press record again, it would just keep recording that clip. When I press record a second time, it stops recording on the next downbeat. So that means we get a nice even 1, 2, 3, 4 bar loop, depending on what you're going for. Let me try that one more time so you can watch. Play the project, listen to the downbeat. 1, 2, 3, 4, hit record, comes in on the next downbeat. Let's loop. I hit it right before. So essentially, in the 1 bar record quantization, if you hit that record button anytime after a downbeat, it will not stop recording until the next downbeat. You could turn this record launch quantization completely off, and what would happen is the moment you touch that button, it would start recording, and then if you pressed it again, it would stop the loop. But your loop likely isn't going to be in time with the rest of your project. I'll demonstrate. See, it's weird and kind of off. Now, I could have been more precise. That's how an actual looper works. It's up to the player to decide what is in time. But in Ableton Live, when you're working with some set loops and some loops that you're creating, you want everything to be very, linked up together in time. It's not like a looper, which is basically 1, 2, 3, 4 tracks that you're deciding where the time is and where the downbeat is. Ableton has its own downbeat. It's got its metronome, it's got its clock. So if you want to take this a step further, you can actually apply a different launch quantization to each individual clip. So I'm going to set my global launch quantization back to 1 bar. And just to demonstrate the whole looping thing one more time, I'm going to record a loop with these vocal samples. Another interesting thing is the Countin. So if I press record and the project is not playing, it will count me in 4 beats and then I'll start recording. 4, 1. There we go. Nice solid 2-bar loop that's linked up in time. I'm gonna go over to the drums now, arm the drum track. Quantize that. Now, let's say I wanted to add a cool effect, like a drum roll like that, into my project. And I've got it here, and I don't want this to exist as a loop. I want to be able to just press the button and make it happen. So I'm going to turn loop off on this clip, and then I'm going to dive into the settings here a bit. And I'm going to go to launch, this little L right here. And if I bring this down, it has its own quantization, and right now all of the clips are set to be with the global quantization, the one we talked about earlier. But if I do this drop down right here, you see that each individual clip can have its own timing, and I'm just going to set that to none. So if you have a controller like the launch key or a launch pad, a controller that's made specifically for Ableton, it's got clip launching capabilities. So if you compare the lights on my launch key right now to the project, you'll see that they're identical. That's because those are all the clips. So if I press this button, the vocal sample will start to play. Then I can cue the drums. All working off of that 1-bar record quantization. Now I'll cue the shaker. I'm going to change the shaker. It's going to change on 1. But this drum roll has no quantization, so when I push that button, it's just going to play regardless of what beat I'm on. Notice how that came in before. I'm going to press the button on 3, 4. It doesn't wait till 1 to come in because I turned that quantization off. And there's lots of ways you can get creative with it. You can have different clips on different quantizations so that when you launch them, they're coming in at different times than all the other clips. It's also super useful if you need a little more time to loop or press a button. You notice that when I was playing in my loops before, I had to be very quick because it was on the next downbeat that I would start looping. And then there's one other way that I want to show you that you can loop if you don't want to have to mess with that record button and being directly in time. What you can do is, and I'll do this with the vocal sample that I was using, you can create an empty clip. So I'm going to double click in this empty clip slot, and that automatically gives me a 1-bar loop. But what I want to do is make it a 2-bar loop. So I'm going to press this ×2 here. Boom, and now we have ×2. Now I'm going to arm this track right here so that I can play it. I'm going to play the same musical idea, but I'm not going to have to worry about pressing record to loop. Instead, what I'm going to do, let the project run, listening to the time, and I'm going to press record, and technically it is recording right now. Now I still had to play in time with my project. That's why I'm playing along with something. I'm not just playing with nothing. I'm at least listening to the metronome, and in this case I'm listening to the shaker and the kick drum to keep me in time and know where my one is. But notice that I didn't have to punch in and punch out really quickly with the record button because this blank clip already existed. And in Ableton Live, I'll delete these notes for now. When you press the session record button, you will record either a brand new clip into an empty slot or over an existing slot. This is extremely useful for live performances where you might say no that you're going to play a 1, 2, 3, 4 bar loop, so you can set it up automatically to be there. That way when you're playing live or doing any kind of performance, you can just play and not have to actually worry about punch in, punch out, which can get really tricky, especially if you're using 2 hands on a keyboard or 2 hands to finger a drum. You can just, have your project going, and then when you feel like it, record. And then while that's still there, I can record on top of that. And it won't stop being armed for recording until you turn that off. Now it's not recording anymore. I think a lot of people get confused when they open up Ableton Live, especially if they have experience with a more traditional looper where you're stomping on a pedal to set that downbeat, that in and out looping. But just think of Ableton Live as having its own clock and its own time, and we have to adapt to that. So you want to make sure that you set the tempo where you want it to be from the start of your project so that you can create loops on the fly that will all sync up together and won't sound like a big mess when they start to not align. Thanks so much for watching this video. I hope it was helpful. If it was, let us know in a comment down below. And if you're interested in learning electronic music production, either in New York City or online, you should check out 343labs.com. I've got my own channel, youtube.com/TAETRO, which I will leave linked in the description. Thank you so much for watching. This has been TAETRO for 343 Labs. Have a good one.